The morning shift at St. Helena's Medical Center had finally drawn to a close. Clara Bennett peeled off her latex gloves and pressed the back of her wrist against her temple, feeling that deep, throbbing pulse of exhaustion that came only after 12 hours on her feet. Beyond the frosted window pane, snow drifted through the Minneapolis skyline in slow, deliberate spirals. The world looked hushed, serene, almost merciful, which felt cruelly ironic. Her phone buzzed on the counter beside her. Liam, can we meet? Same place. 11 Hars a.m. Clara stared at the message. There was no heart emoji, no affectionate tone, not even his usual teasing punctuation. Just words, flat, clinical, stripped of warmth. Her chest tightened, though she didn't understand why. She typed back, on my way, before she could talk herself out of it. By the time she reached the downtown cafe, the snow had thickened, swirling like white smoke around the glass front. The smell of roasted coffee beans and cinnamon usually comforted her. Not today. She spotted Liam right away, sitting by the window, his charcoal blazer draped over the chair, his phone face down on the table. He didn't look up until she was standing in front of him. You look like someone about to deliver a bad diagnosis, Clara said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Liam stirred his coffee slowly. The metallic spoon chimed against the porcelain, his jaw tight. I've been thinking, he began, his voice quiet but firm. About us. Clara froze. That phrase, about us, had ended more relationships than she cared to count. Okay, she said softly, bracing herself. He exhaled, gaze drifting toward the window as though the snow outside could spare him from this conversation. I don't think we should get married. The words struck her like a physical blow. The hum of the espresso machine, the murmur of other conversations, all of it faded into a blur of meaningless noise. What? She whispered. Liam leaned back in his seat, eyes refusing to meet hers. It's not working. You're wonderful, Clara, you really are. But things have changed. I've changed. Her pulse thudded hard in her ears. Changed? We set a date, Liam. We signed the lease. I know, he said, rubbing the bridge of his nose. But there's someone else. The room seemed to tilt. Who? He hesitated only a second. Sophie Langford. Clara's breath caught. Langford? The daughter of your father's business partner? He didn't deny it. His expression was measured, coldly composed, maybe even relieved. It's complicated, he said. But she and I, it just makes sense. Her family's been good to mine, to me. Clara let out a brittle laugh, sharp enough to make the couple nearby glance over. Good to you, she repeated. So that's what this is really about? Convenience? He didn't argue. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the small velvet box she had once slipped off during a fitting. The diamond inside still glimmered, pale, perfect, untouched. I think it's best if you take this back, he said simply. Clara pushed it toward him. Keep it. You'll need it soon enough. For a split second, something flickered in his face. Shame, maybe, but it vanished before it could mean anything. He stood, adjusted his tie, and without another word, walked out of the cafe, leaving her behind with her cooling coffee and a silence that felt bottomless. Outside, the snowfall had turned heavier. Minneapolis blurred into a watercolor of gray and white. Clara walked without direction, her breath fogging the air, each step crunching into icy pavement. The cold bit at her cheeks, but it was the ache in her chest that numbed her most. By the time she reached the small house on Elmwood Drive, her fingers had gone completely numb. The front door opened before she even touched it. Clara? Margaret Bennett, her mother, stood in the doorway, silver hair pulled into a loose bun, eyes soft and searching. Sweetheart, what happened? Clara's lips trembled. He's gone. Margaret didn't ask for details. She simply reached forward and wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her tight, the way she used to when Clara woke crying from thunderstorms as a child. Then let him go, Margaret whispered. You don't chase people who can't see your worth. They stood that way for a long time, the only sound the steady tick of the kitchen clock behind them. Later that night, after her mother had gone to bed, Clara sat alone at the table. The wind rattled the windows. The house creaked under the weight of winter. Her engagement planner lay open in front of her, a pastel notebook filled with now meaningless dreams, guest lists, flower arrangements, honeymoon plans. Liam Carter was scrawled in looping cursive across the cover. She turned off the lamp, leaving only the faint orange glow from the streetlights outside. Snowflakes brushed the glass like tiny, delicate ghosts. In the reflection, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Pale, tired, eyes hollow from trying too hard to be strong. She didn't stop the tears this time. They came quietly, without anger, just the kind of surrender that happens when there's nothing left to fight for. When the clock struck midnight, Clara rose, rinsed her cup, and whispered into the stillness. Tomorrow will be different. But deep down, she didn't believe it. Not yet. Morning came softly. The light filtering through the frosted glass painted the kitchen in shades of gold and gray. Margaret sat at the table, nursing her coffee, while Clara stirred a cup she hadn't yet tasted. The silence was heavy, not awkward, just the kind that follows loss. Clara, Margaret said gently, don't lose your faith in people. Not everyone will fail you the way he did. Clara's lips quirked in a faint, humorless smile. I'm not sure I have much faith left, Mom. Then borrow mine, Margaret replied simply, squeezing her hand. That warmth, that quiet reassurance, lingered long after Clara left the kitchen. She spent the next few hours aimlessly scrolling through job listings, pretending to care. She wasn't ready to go back to the hospital yet. Not to the same corridors where Liam used to wait for her after shifts, coffee in hand. Not to the same cafeteria where he once swore forever. Her phone buzzed again. Tara Hudson. Hey, C. Still job hunting? Might have something for you. Private care, great pay. Clara immediately called her friend. There's this guy, Tara explained, voice light, cheerful. Wealthy, mid-30s, had an accident last year, lives out by Lake Minnetonka, needs a live-in nurse. Room, meals, and... She paused for effect. A salary that'll make you blink. How generous are we talking? Clara asked skeptically. Let's just say you could clear your car loan in 3 months, Tara said. Only catch, he's impossible. Fired 5 nurses already. You'll have to impress his housekeeper first. Her name's Mrs. Evelyn Gray. I told her about you. Clara hesitated. Tara, I'm not sure I'm in the right headspace for someone impossible. That's exactly why you should take it, Tara countered. You need a reset, see? Let someone else's chaos drown out yours for a while. 2 hours later, Clara found herself standing before a sprawling iron gate carved with the name Whitmore Estate. The driveway wound through snow-laden pine trees, opening onto a sleek mansion of glass and stone overlooking the frozen lake. The air shimmered with cold, her breath visible in small white clouds. The front door opened before she could knock. A tall, silver-haired woman in a tailored gray suit appeared, posture immaculate. You must be Miss Bennett, she said crisply. I'm Mrs. Gray. Yes, ma'am, thank you for meeting me. Come in. The interior gleamed. Marble floors, chrome accents, silence so polished it felt fragile. Mrs. Gray led her to a small sitting area near the window and placed a leather folder on the table. You come highly recommended by Miss Hudson. Your credentials are excellent. Before we proceed, you'll need to sign this. Clara glanced at the paperwork. A strict confidentiality agreement. No photos, no outside communication, no discussing the patient's condition or personal life. It was tighter than any hospital policy she'd ever signed. I understand, she said, scrawling her signature. Mrs. Gray nodded. You'll manage medication schedules, physical therapy support, and meal coordination. 2 days off per month, annual salary, $100,000 plus benefits. Clara blinked. That's 3 times my hospital pay. Mr. Whitmore can afford to be generous, Mrs. Gray said evenly. He demands professionalism and privacy in return. Does that concern you? Clara met her gaze. No. I think I could use a challenge. Mrs. Gray's expression softened by a fraction. Then report tomorrow at noon. Bring only essentials. Everything else will be provided. When Clara stepped outside, the snow had started again, falling like whispers. As the black SUV waiting by the gate pulled away, she looked back through the veil of pines at the massive house beyond. For the first time in weeks, she felt something faint but real. Not happiness, not yet, but the beginning of it. Maybe this was how starting over began. Quietly, in the snow, heading toward something she didn't yet understand. The next afternoon, the SUV wound through miles of snow-coated forest before the road widened into an open stretch that revealed Whitmore Estate in its full, imposing grandeur. It was the kind of place that didn't just sit on the land, it commanded it. Steel, glass, and stone rose in clean, deliberate lines. Every angle reflected the frozen lake beyond, which glimmered beneath the pale winter sun like a slab of glass. The place looked flawless, but in that perfection there was something unsettling, too still, too silent, like beauty suspended in time. Mrs. Gray greeted her at the door, as precise as yesterday. "Mr. Whitmore values punctuality," she said simply. "Follow me." The warmth inside hit Clara like a wave. The air smelled faintly of cedarwood and antiseptic, a strange mix of nature and sterility. Every inch of the house gleamed, not a single book misplaced, not a rug corner turned. It was immaculate, but soulless. "Where should I put my things?" Clara asked softly. "Your quarters are upstairs, second door on the left," Mrs. Gray replied. "But first, Mr. Whitmore wishes to meet you." They passed through a corridor lined with abstract paintings, all dark, brooding colors, thick brush strokes that looked more like bruises than art. When they reached the far end, Mrs. Gray stopped before a wide doorway. "He's inside." The room was bathed in pale light from floor to ceiling windows overlooking the frozen lake. A wheelchair sat turned toward the glass, a tall figure seated in it, posture perfectly straight. "Mr. Whitmore," Mrs. Gray announced. "This is Miss Bennett, your new live-in nurse." The man didn't turn right away. For several seconds, the only sound was the soft hum of the radiator. Then he rotated the chair slightly, and Clara caught her first glimpse of him. Adrian Whitmore was younger than she'd expected, 34 maybe, with an intensity that felt almost physical. His face was sharply cut, his dark hair slightly unkempt, his eyes a pale, stormy gray that seemed to absorb everything they saw. There was something haunting in them, something used to control but not comfort. "So," he said, his tone measured, almost indifferent. "Number 6. Clara blinked. "I'm sorry?" "You're the 6th nurse in 11 months, he said flatly. "I like to keep count. Helps me manage disappointment." "Mrs.?" Gray's eyes flicked toward Clara in warning. "Don't argue." But Clara didn't flinch. Instead, she gave a faint, steady smile. "Then I'll do my best not to make it to 7. Something shifted in Adrian's expression. The smallest flicker of curiosity, maybe annoyance, maybe both, before it vanished. He gestured to the stack of files beside him. "Those are therapy notes, medication logs, dietary plans. Study them, memorize them. And please," his voice dipped lower, "spare me the sympathy speeches. I've heard them all." "I wasn't planning to give one," Clara replied evenly. That earned her a long, assessing glance. Not hostile, not kind, just the kind a man gives when he's used to testing people until they break. For a moment, it almost felt like a contest of silence. Then Mrs. Gray, sensing the tension, interjected smoothly, "Mr. Whitmore, it's almost mealtime. Shall I have it brought here?" "No," he said curtly. "We'll dine in the main room. Let's make our guest feel part of the routine." The dining room was a minimalist masterpiece. Glass walls overlooking the lake, a long oak table polished to a mirror shine. 3 settings had been laid out, one for him, one for Mrs. Gray, and one precisely between them for Clara. The atmosphere was tense but oddly formal, like an audition. Adrian ate with mechanical precision, every motion exact. The only sounds were the quiet clink of silverware and the faint crackle of the fire at the far end of the room. Finally, Mrs. Gray spoke. "Miss Bennett, have you lived in Minnesota long?" "All my life," Clara said. "My mother's here too. She teaches English literature at Northview High." Mrs. Gray nodded approvingly. "Good. Stability matters in this household." Adrian smirked faintly. "Stability," he echoed. "An interesting word for someone who keeps leaving." Mrs. Gray's eyes softened, but she didn't rise to it. "You've driven away 5 nurses, Adrian. Not because you're unmanageable, because you refuse to let anyone help you." He set down his fork, eyes cold. "Maybe that's because I don't need help." Clara didn't speak. But she saw it. The subtle tremor in his right hand, the micro pause in his motion that betrayed pain. He might have been defiant, but he wasn't fine. Dinner ended in silence. Mrs. Gray excused herself, leaving Clara to follow her upstairs to her quarters. The room was spacious but unadorned. White walls, a narrow bed, a window overlooking the lake. The view was beautiful in a way that hurt. Ice stretched as far as the eye could see, glittering like fractured glass under the pale dusk. Clara unpacked slowly, her thoughts circling back to the man downstairs. He wasn't cruel. He was wounded, deeply, invisibly. And his arrogance wasn't strength, it was armor. That night, she couldn't sleep. The estate was too quiet. The kind of silence that wasn't peace, just absence. Around midnight, a sound broke it, a faint metallic clank, rhythmic, heavy. Then a thud, another, something moving, struggling. Clara hesitated, then slipped from bed, pulling her cardigan tight. The corridor was dimly lit, shadows stretching long across the floor. The sound came again, from the far end of the hall near the lower level. She followed it, her heart quickening. At the end of the passage, a narrow door stood ajar, light spilling through its seam. Clara pushed it open quietly. The room was a private gym, its walls mirrored, every machine gleaming under soft white lights. And in the center, gripping the metal rails of a set of parallel bars, stood Adrian Whitmore. No wheelchair, just sweat-drenched determination. His arms trembled, face flushed, teeth clenched in pain as he tried to lift his weight through his legs. He managed one step before his right leg buckled. The chair behind him stood empty like a silent witness. Clara gasped without meaning to. Adrian's head snapped up, his gray eyes flared. "What are you doing here?" "I heard something," she said, staying near the door. "You thought what?" He cut sharply. "That I'd fallen? That I needed rescuing?" He reached for the rail again, but his hand slipped. A grimace of pain crossed his face, gone as quickly as it came. "Let me," she began. "Don't!" he barked, voice slicing through the air. "Don't you dare!" She froze. The fury in his voice wasn't about her. It was about weakness, his own. "I'm not here to pity you," she said quietly. He glared at her, chest heaving. "Then why are you here, Miss Bennett? You don't belong in this part of my life." Clara met his gaze steadily. "Then what part does anyone belong to? The one where you sit by the window pretending you're not still fighting to stand?" His jaw tightened. The silence that followed wasn't just tense, it was charged. He looked away first toward the lake beyond the mirrored walls. After a moment, he reached for the wheelchair again. His fingers trembled with fatigue. He didn't ask for help, and Clara didn't offer it. She just moved quietly to the far end of the bars, standing still, watching. "You don't have to do this alone," she said softly. Adrian let out a dry laugh. "You think a nurse can fix this?" "No," Clara said. "But a human being can try." For a long time, neither moved. Finally, he lowered himself into the chair, sweat shining at his temples. The anger had drained from his eyes, leaving only exhaustion. "You saw nothing tonight," he muttered. Clara folded her arms. "Then let me be the one who helps you keep it that way." That made him pause. His eyes met hers, searching for mockery, for pity, but there was none, only quiet conviction. "Why?" he asked, voice rough. "Because I've seen people give up," she said, "and you haven't." The room went still again. The snow outside whispered against the windows. "If we do this," he said finally, "it's on my terms. No therapist, no reports, no witnesses. Understood?" Clara nodded. "On one condition." He raised a brow. "Which is?" "You trust me." A ghost of a smile tugged at his mouth. "That's not something I give easily." "I'm not asking you to give it," she said quietly. "Just don't take it away once it's there." From upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Mrs. Gray, perhaps, checking the halls. The moment hung between them like the frost on the window, fragile and glimmering. "You should get some rest, Miss Bennett," he said at last, his tone gentler than before. "So should you, Mr. Whitmore." She turned to leave, her footsteps soft against the polished floor. He didn't move for a long while, just sat there, staring at the snow outside. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel empty. Outside, the storm thickened, snow swirling like 1,000 soft secrets against the glass. Adrian closed his eyes. His breathing steadied. Somewhere deep inside, a wall had cracked, just slightly. And though neither of them could see it yet, something had begun to change. Something that would soon cost them both far more than they expected. The following weeks unfolded with a rhythm that felt both fragile and strangely steady. Every morning at 7, Clara entered the private gym, clipboard in hand, to find Adrian already there, sometimes waiting in silence, other times pretending he wasn't waiting at all. Their sessions became battles of will disguised as therapy. He hated instruction, despised pity, and loathed being reminded of limits. She understood that and never once treated him as broken. "Straighten your spine," she'd tell him, keeping her tone light but firm. "You're compensating with your arms again." "I know what I'm doing," he'd mutter through gritted teeth. "Then you wouldn't still need me," she'd counter, meeting his glare with calm certainty. And for just a fraction of a second, his lips would twitch. Not a smile exactly, but the ghost of one. Progress came slowly, almost imperceptibly, but it came. Each week he stood a little longer, moved a little steadier, and argued a little less. The defiance that had once filled every room he entered began to thin, replaced by something quieter, something that almost looked like hope. Mrs. Gray noticed the difference too. She never said much, but her sharp eyes softened when Clara entered a room. Once, after a particularly good session, she even stopped Clara in the corridor. "You've done what 5 nurses couldn't," she said, voice low, unreadable. "He's different around you." Clara smiled faintly. "He's stronger than he lets on." Mrs. Gray nodded, then hesitated. "Be careful, Miss Bennet. Mr. Whitmore's strength isn't always kindness." The warning hung in the air long after she walked away. By the 3rd month, winter had begun to loosen its grip. The ice on Lake Minnetonka cracked in veins of silver, and the first hints of sunlight slipped through the clouds. One morning, Clara arrived to find the gym empty. The parallel bars gleamed untouched. Panic fluttered in her chest as she turned toward the hall and froze. Adrian was in the corridor, one hand pressed against the wall for balance, the other gripping a cane. His face was pale, tense, but his expression carried that familiar stubbornness. "You're supposed to wait for me," she said, half scolding, half awed. He raised an eyebrow. "You told me not to depend on you." "Not to ignore medical advice," she shot back, stepping closer. "There's a difference." But before she could continue, something flickered across his face. Not pain this time, but something deeper. "Do you know why I'm like this?" he asked suddenly. Clara blinked. "You had a car accident. That's what Mrs. Gray said." Adrian's jaw tightened. "That's what everyone says." He turned toward the window, his reflection framed in the morning light, pale, haunted. "I didn't crash. Someone ran me off the road." The air seemed to freeze around them. "It was raining that night," he continued quietly. "I'd just left a charity gala. The brakes failed halfway down the hill near Stony Creek. The car flipped twice. I woke up in the hospital. Broken spine. Partial paralysis. Police said it was a mechanical fault." His mouth twisted bitterly. "But I know better." "Who?" Clara asked softly. He looked at her then, his eyes colder than the lake outside. "Lucas Langford. The same man whose family now holds 30% of Whitmore Industries. The same man whose daughter Sophie is engaged to Liam Carter, your ex-fiancé." Clara's breath caught. "What?" Adrian's gaze hardened. "You didn't know?" She shook her head. "No. Liam told me about Sophie. But I didn't know she was a Langford." He gave a humorless laugh. "Small world, isn't it? The Langfords own half this city's soul and they buy the rest." Clara's stomach twisted. The same name, the same family, the same invisible chain of power that had already torn her life apart. Adrian turned back toward the lake. "Lucas Langford wasn't just my rival, he was my partner. We built the company together. Then came the accident, the malfunction, and suddenly my shares were transferred, my board seat revoked, my reputation dismantled. All while I was learning to walk again." Clara stared at him, heart pounding. "And the police never investigated?" He gave a faint, bitter smile. "They did. And the Langfords donated a new police wing a month later." Silence stretched between them. The house, the snow, even the ticking of the old clock down the hall. Everything seemed to hold its breath. "So that's why you keep everyone out," Clara said quietly. "That's why I stopped believing in anyone," he corrected. She looked at him for a long moment and then said, "Maybe you stopped believing in the wrong people." He didn't answer. but something in his eyes flickered. The smallest crack in the wall he'd built around himself. That night, she couldn't sleep. The Langford name echoed through her mind like a curse. Liam's betrayal, Adrian's ruined life, both threads tangled in the same web of privilege and deceit. For the first time, anger didn't make her tremble. It made her focused. When she met Adrian in the gym the next morning, he noticed the change instantly. "You're quiet," he said. "Just thinking," she replied. "About what?" "About how unfair it is that people like the Langfords get to walk away clean." Adrian gave her a long, assessing look. "Revenge isn't therapy, Miss Bennett." "No," she said, "but sometimes it's medicine." He stared at her for a moment longer. Then, to her surprise, he laughed. A real laugh. Low, quiet, almost disbelieving. "You're dangerous," he murmured. "You have no idea," she said. From that day forward, their partnership changed. Their sessions weren't just about healing anymore. They were about rebuilding, planning, strengthening, both body and will. Clara began spending her evenings in the study, helping him sort through company records, board transcripts, and old financial statements. She learned about Whitmore Industries, about the Langford takeover, about the shell companies that had quietly funneled his assets away while he lay in traction. And in the process, she found something of her own, a spark of purpose she hadn't felt since before Liam broke her heart. They worked side by side late into the night, two wounded souls bound by shared betrayal. Slowly, trust, the one thing Adrian claimed he couldn't give, began to grow between them. One evening, as the snow melted into rain outside, he looked up from the papers and said quietly, "You remind me of who I used to be." Clara smiled faintly. "Angry and self-destructive?" He chuckled. "Relentless, unafraid to start again." "Starting again isn't brave," she said softly. "It's necessary." He studied her, the firelight flickering across his face. "You know, I used to think survival was about strength. Now I think it's about having the right ally." Clara met his gaze. "Then it's a good thing you finally stopped pushing them away." For a moment, neither looked away. The silence between them wasn't empty now. It was alive, thrumming with something unspoken and undeniable. Spring arrived quietly. The snow retreated, revealing green beneath the white. Adrian's cane became more of an accessory than a necessity. By the end of April, he walked unaided for the first time. Slow, deliberate, but proud. Mrs. Gray watched from the doorway, hands clasped tightly, a rare smile softening her face. Clara stood beside him, fighting back tears. "You did it," she whispered. He glanced at her, breath uneven, a faint, triumphant smirk curving his lips. "We did." For a moment, the world outside the glass walls didn't exist, just the two of them and the quiet miracle of standing again. But as all moments do, it passed. Adrian turned toward the horizon, his gaze sharpening. "Now it's time they see I'm not finished." Clara knew what he meant. The Langfords, Liam, everyone who had taken what wasn't theirs. And though part of her feared the darkness in his voice, another part, the part still carrying her own scars, couldn't help but agree. "Then let's make them regret it," she said. He looked at her, surprise flickering into admiration. "You really are dangerous," she smiled. "You taught me well." That summer, the Whitmore name returned to the headlines, first in whispers, then in bold print. Anonymous leaks, internal audits, a quiet but devastating investigation into Langford Holdings. No one knew who was behind it, but the timing, the precision, the strategy, it all carried the same ruthless brilliance Adrian once wielded from his boardroom chair. And through it all, Clara stood beside him, calm, unwavering, unseen. They never spoke of revenge again. They didn't need to. It was in every calculated move, every late-night conversation, every careful silence. One evening, months later, as the sun dipped behind the lake, Adrian stood by the window, cane resting against the frame. His reflection merged with hers beside him. "They said recovery would take years," he murmured. "They underestimated you," she replied. He turned, eyes softening. "No, Clara. They underestimated us." She smiled faintly. "So what now?" Adrian looked out at the lake, the ice long gone, the water shimmering under the dying light. Now, he said quietly, we rebuild, on our own terms. The air between them felt charged, alive, like the pause before a new beginning. Clara stepped closer, the soft scent of rain mingling with cedar and memory. You know, she said, I used to think losing everything was the worst thing that could happen. And now? He asked. Now I think it's how you find out what you're really made of. Outside, the first stars appeared over the water. The world had turned full circle, from frozen silence to this quiet warmth. And for the first time in a long time, both of them, two broken souls stitched together by pain and purpose, believed in something again. Not love, not yet, but something deeper,